And next we have Street Cultivation by Sarah Lynn. It's called, here it is, 607 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. In the modern world, key is money. The days of traveling martial artists and mountaintop masters are over. Power is controlled by corporations, modernized martial arts sects, and governments. Those at the bottom of the society struggle as second-class citizens in a world in which power is a commodity. Rick is a young fighter in this world. He doesn't dream of immortality or becoming the strongest, just of building a better life for himself and his sister who suffers from a spiritual illness. Unfortunately, life isn't that easy. So there you go. Actually, those are all the main points in world building stuff. So good novel description. This is from the author of the New Game Minus series, which is another LitRPG series that I've really enjoyed. And it is a series of the Street Cultivation, rather, is a series that Thou describes as 80% cultivation, 20% LitRPG. And I think that's actually a very nice way to describe this. It is mostly a cultivation series, but there are RPG aspects in how the cultivation is done and quantified and people's levels. So there's a quantified system here. How good that system is a different issue, but it does exist, and there are gains in power. There's a power progression system that's clearly noted in item descriptions and character page descriptions and all that good stuff. So this is LitRPG, but again, it mostly revolves around cultivation, which is a very interesting thing. So not every cultivation series is going to be LitRPG. A lot of them generally aren't. But there are some that are specifically written by usually LitRPG authors who are like, oh, I can kind of combine these things too and hit both audiences, and a lot of people really seem to enjoy it, as is the case with this particular story. The story is a cultivation story set in a modern world where a person's power, position, and status are tied to how much. Now in this story, it's not called key; it's called lucrium. So that's a different distinction, but even the author's like, I have to call it key in the novel description because other people won't know what I'm talking about. But there's a specific progression system in the story that is custom made, which some people might have issues with. The plot is fairly slice of life with several conflicts, but it's mostly about the main character, again, trying to make a living while his cultivation attempts are being siphoned off by his sister, who has a unique ailment. It transitions into a tournament fighting and class warfare thing, storyline to a degree. And, of course, like good personal training and development, which is always a key aspect of cultivation stories, and of course many LitRPG stories as well. The game mechanics are seen fairly regularly, but again, this is a custom system, so there are going to be custom rules, custom resource pools, but there are also familiar things like notifications, character stat sheets, rankings, lucrium generation level. So they're going to be things that are familiar to you. If you've ever read anything LitRPG related, you're like, oh, those things, I can kind of maybe make sense of them. But one of the issues for me, of course, was the fact that the story kind of lacks a foundational explanation of how this custom system and how this cultivation works in this world. The story explains this on a need-to-know basis as the story goes on. Like, if things come up, the author's like, oh, by the way, here's an explanation in the story of this thing I might have showed you 5 or 6 other times because it hasn't come up in general conversation or like an actual part of the story. I'm not telling you about it until now, or sometimes it'll appear as a new thing entirely on both the character's status page or in the conversation. Like, oh, I've never heard of this before, but apparently it's a thing now. And that kind of left me feeling like the progression system was a bit ungrounded sometimes, or a little, I want to say made up as it goes along, but that's kind of the impression I got from that system sometimes in the story. Although I also want to point out, though, that the author in her story explains every term, every idea in an appendix in the back. She even makes a note in the beginning of the story saying, my readers have had like mixed feelings about the way that the system is explained. So if you don't mind the explain on as it goes along, just read the story, but you can also just read the appendix at the back, and that might help you out. And I honestly wish I had done that, because it might have made the story feel a little more, the system feel a little more grounded for me, but that's me. Outside of that slight bit of frustration for me, though, the story is pretty fine. It, again, slice of life. There are some good martial arts scenes. The cultivation is nice. It's, again, I like the modern setting of it. The story is probably stretched out a little more than it needs to at 607 pages. but other than that, it's nice. It has a nice, full, satisfying ending, some nice character development stuff. I especially like the plot line between the main character and his sister. That's probably my favorite storyline in this novel. I like the story. I don't like it quite as much as the New Game Minus series for me, but that one's strictly LitRPG. But this is nice, and I think you'll like it if you like Cultivation and LitRPG. So here we go. For me, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. That's Street Cultivation by Sarah Lynn with a score of 7.1 out of 10.